Anytime I show my lacunosas, I always get comments from people saying that lacunosas are difficult, they're finicky, they've killed everyone they've ever tried to grow, and could I please do a video about growing lacunosa? So join me with a tasty beverage of your choice close to hand while we take a look at You Can't Grow Lacunosa? And before we get underway, I'd like to send out a special thank you to Charitas4347, who sent me a super thanks recently. Your support for my channel goes a long way in keeping me in Hoyas and Dischidia's technology and infrastructure, and is very much appreciated. So here's a heartfelt thanks for your support. And we've got something in bloom this week, but before we get to that, we also had our first appreciable snowfall of the year, and so here's some footage of it. It ended up totaling approximately 6 inches, which is about 15 centimeters, and it was heavy, wet snow. I had to move some of it, but it was kind of neat, and it's a little bit of a winter wonderland. It'll be ugly in a couple days, but that's okay. And there's another storm on the way, so fingers crossed for us all. Now, in bloom this week is a plant I bought with the name AH074. And I've recently learned that it is a Carnosa clone out of Hoyas in Thailand. And let's see if I can get this into, and it is very, very pretty. It's sometimes known as Silver Moon, but yeah, this is its first time it's bloomed for me, and it's just beautiful. Great, great. There's a little bit of a scent, but it's early afternoon here, so it might get stronger as the evening progresses. It's just a little bit floral, but lightly floral, not overwhelming. But yeah, I'm very happy about that. That's very pretty. First time it's bloomed in 4 years, so that's very cool. This is Hoya AH074. It's a Carnosa variety, sometimes known as Silver Moon. Now, I find Hoya lacunosa one of the easiest Hoyas to grow. They give me no difficulties whatsoever. Matter of fact, the only problem I have with them is keeping up with the watering, because at a certain point, they turn into rather thirsty plants. And the first one I'm showing you, this is just a generic plain green Hoya lacunosa who's a little thirsty. The heat is drying things out in the winter, but he's doing okay. This one's been cut back several times, and if you like lacunosa, you know why you do. Those leaves are just amazing. And once they get blooming, they just keep on blooming. So if you've had trouble growing lacunosa, it's time to stop and think about what you've been doing. And it may mean that you have to change something in your growing procedure, in your growing system. You can't just keep doing the same thing over and over again and having plants fail without making some adaptation on your part. So that's some of the things we're going to talk about today. Now, the way I grow my lacunosa is not the only way to grow lacunosa. It's simply what I do. That's all I can speak to. I can mention other ways, other techniques, other possibilities, but I got to show you what I've had success with. So yeah, see what I do, take what you can use, leave behind what you can't, and see if we can get you growing lacunosa. Now, where is lacunosa from? And that's kind of important to all of this. Lacunosa is native to Brunei, to Java, Kalimantan, and Sumatra in Indonesia, to Malaya, Sabah, and Sarawak in Malaysia, to the Philippines, and to Thailand. So that's going to affect what's going to help them grow to be their best. And this little lovely is from my friend Mona, and this is Hoya lacunosa, Louisa's Silver. So what does where they're from mean? So the countries I listed have an average temperature of 22 to 32 degrees centigrade, which is 73 to 89 degrees Fahrenheit, year-round. The average rainfall varies from 1,500 millimeters, or 58 inches, to 7,500 millimeters, which is over 300 inches. Now, here where I live in Rhode Island, the average amount of rainfall is 40 to 50 inches, or 1,000 to 1,200 millimeters per year. So lacunosa, Hoya lacunosa, live in places that have humid tropical climate. It's warm and it's moist. And that means that you don't treat them like desert succulents, despite what all the advice is on the internet, or what the packaging said, or what your great-grandmother did. They don't want to dry out, and they want ready access to moisture. So that's a basic concept to keep in mind when you're looking at your lacunosa, when you're trying to figure out how to give them care that they're going to appreciate. Now, you don't need special equipment, cabinets or grow tents. Your Hoyas may appreciate that, but they're not necessary. I don't have a grow tent and I don't have any cabinets. All of my Hoya lacunosa grow in ambient temperatures and they do fine. And the one we're looking at right now is Hoya durian perungan, and it's in bloom right there. And it's a beautiful, beautiful little plant. Hoyas are epiphytes. Now, I know you've heard that, you've heard me say it, but what does that all really mean? Well, I looked it up in the dictionary, so I have an official definition. And an epiphyte is a plant that derives its moisture and nutrients from air and rain and grows usually on another plant. And that's from Merriam-Webster Dictionary. So that's something to keep in mind when you're trying to grow your lacunosa. And this is Hoya lacunosa giant leaf. And you may notice that some of these leaves are indeed quite good sized compared to other lacunosa. So what does that mean, that Hoyas and lacunosa are epiphytes? It means that they did not evolve to grow in soil. And indeed, most Hoyas, some do, but not all, most Hoyas do not grow in soil. Their leaves evolved to grow on the sides of trees and other plants, and to take advantage of the rainfall and the moisture in the air for their humidity. So trying to grow your Hoya lacunosa in soil is not what they've evolved to handle. And it's not going to let them grow and develop to their best potential. So you need to avoid using a soil-based substrate. Or I avoid using a soil-based substrate because no matter how much perlite and bark you add, the roots are still not evolved to use that kind of a setup. And this little beauty is Hoya lacunosa Laos. And it has turned into just a little monster here. But it's a beautifully variegated plant. So if you haven't had success with Hoya lacunosa, whatever variety, and you struggle with it, here's the next step you should take. Sit down and on your phone or on a piece of paper with a pen, pencil, whatever, you write down the details of how you've been growing it. And think about what substrate you've tried, what kind of container you've tried, what kind of light you gave it, what was your watering regimen, and how did you feed it? And write down all those things. And do it right now if you want to pause this. Write down all those things because we're going to talk about them one by one. and you can see if perhaps there's something you can do differently the next time you try a lacunosa. And this little beauty is Hoya lacunosa poonsack, and it's in bloom on several peduncles. One more down here. It's a good grower for me. It's a good bloomer. Love these long, narrow leaves. Yeah, Hoya lacunosa poonsack. Now, when you start off, you're either going to start off with a rooted plant or with a cutting. And if you have a rooted plant, then most of your troubles will be much smaller. Thing to do before you do anything with it is take a look at the substrate and see what kind of substrate it came in. Now, I usually recommend rooting your plants in what you're going to grow them in. But if you're buying an already rooted plant, then you don't have any control over that. So you're not necessarily going to duplicate the substrate that the plant came in, but it's good to know what it's coming from before you do any transition. There's a lot of substrates that are great for rooting, but are not really great for long-term growth. Again, I like to root it in whatever I'm going to grow it in. Most of mine are growing in a generic pon or pumice or a combination of those two. So my favorite method is to take a cutting and put it in a small plastic cup with some holes or slots in the bottom. And I use my generic pon and pumice mixture and a little bit of nutrient solution in the bottom and let it go. Sometimes, if I remember, I'll use rooting hormone, but you don't need to. It's not a requirement. It will try its best to root for you. Now, it may take 3 weeks to a month, even 5 weeks, before you start to see viable roots through the side of the pot or coming out the bottom. So just be a little patient. I don't necessarily put these in prop boxes. I usually just sit them out here on my desk so I can see how the water level is and what needs to be done and how it's doing. So I don't put it someplace and forget about it. But yeah, so whatever method you use for rooting plants, you can probably use it for your Hoya lacunosa. They're just like everything else, but I always suggest try and root it in what you're going to grow it in. That's going to make the transition to a larger pot easier. And the beauty for this one is my little Hoya lacunosa amarillo. And this one, I wasn't sure I was going to like it because it's got that crazy variegation that almost looks like something's wrong with the plant. But it has turned into a little monster of a grower for me. It blooms regularly and it's very, very pretty. Yes, this is Hoya lacunosa amarillo. Now, when we made our list just a few moments ago, one of the things I asked you to note down was the container that you had used. And while most people may not think the container is important or that you want something that goes with your decor or something that's cute, the container can make all the difference. And what I usually use and what I suggest to people is a wick-based self-watering pot. That means it's a two-part setup. There's an outer pot and an inner pot, and the inner pot has slots all around and wicks that hang out the bottom to tap into the reservoir of nutrient solution or moisture that's in the bottom of this. And that allows the plant to have a humid environment around its roots and to draw moisture as it needs to. I've also had pretty good success with a net pot and a cover pot. And that's a net pot, all kinds of slots, and a cover pot with no holes. And I use an organic mix in my net pot and cover pot, but you could use pumice if you had big chunky pumice. And it does pretty well. It provides a nice, humid, moist atmosphere for the roots, which is what they really like. And You can find net pots in different sizes. This is just an old coffee cup. And you can grow your plant in that if you need to, if you need something cute. But that's a really good setup for plants as well. And I usually use a bark and sphagnum mix, sometimes with some big chunky pumice, but something organic and airy, and the plants will do fairly well in it. Now, I love terracotta. I think it's beautiful. But for me, in my setup, since I don't use soil, I find that the terracotta itself can wick moisture out of the substrate faster than I want it to. And so while you may think that plastic is anathema, for some plants it's a really good solution because it doesn't contribute, the pot itself does not contribute to the drying out of the substrate. So yeah, I suggest a wick-based self-watering pot. And this may be, if you haven't tried it before, your chance to try out self-watering. And the one I'm showing in this section is my Hoya lacunosa mint, which came from my friend Mona. Thank you, Mona. It's doing well, growing successfully. So yeah, Hoya lacunosa mint. And another important component in growing your lacunosa and Hoya in general is the substrate. And when it comes to substrate, I want you to think in terms of the word airy and not chunky. A lot of folks will start off thinking that they just need to add some stuff to their cocoa peat or potting soil mix, throw in some bark, throw in some perlite, and that will make it chunky. And indeed, it will make it chunky, but that's not your goal. Your goal is airy. What that substrate, whether it's organic or inorganic, is trying to do is to create the humid atmosphere that your roots, the roots of your lacunosa, would have growing on the side of a tree in the jungle. So it retains a bit of moisture or pulls up a bit of moisture from the reservoir, but there's lots of space for air around those roots. Something like coco coir and potting soil are going to be too dense, and it's not going to get the airflow that these plants evolved to utilize. So if you're looking at an organic mix, that's what you'd prefer to use. Think about cocoa husk chunks, think about pumice, think about fine bark. A little bit of sphagnum moss is nice in there for a little bit of extra moisture. Other stuff that you want to throw in, but keep it simple. You don't have to go crazy. It doesn't need 9 different components. If you're using inorganic, like pon or pumice, then those are all pretty much taken care of and you can use those. Just keep in mind that pon and pumice have no nutrients in them whatsoever. The other stuff has some nutrients, but neither one has enough to grow your plant in the best way possible. So we're not going to think about chunky, we're going to think about airy. And that's what we're going to go for when whatever substrate you decide to use for your Hoyas. And the little puppy up now is my Hoya lacunosa Asami clone 2. It's an outer variegated leaf. It's very thirsty right now. Occasionally the variegation gets crazy, but it's turned into a really little monster plant, and that's why it's always thirsty. Blooms regularly, and it's a lot of fun. This is Hoya lacunosa Asami clone 2. Now, I recommend using self-watering pots. Combined with the substrate and the container, those two things work together. They let you create a humid environment around the roots, which is what most of these plants evolved to take advantage of. It's what they're accustomed to, and it's where they grow best. So regular access to moisture is important, and it's also important to try and have a steady access. So despite what you may have heard about Hoyas liking to dry out, they really don't, and they don't have that circumstance of that lots of rain and then desert dry back and forth cycle where they are evolved to grow, where the evolution took place. So steady, reliable watering is important, and the self-watering pot evens that all out for you. Now, inorganic mixes have absolutely no innate nutrients in them. They're just rock. So you must supplement your plants that are growing in pon or pumice or things like that. There's no nutrients in that rock. And so you must use a nutrient solution. Now, a foliar spray is great, and I have used them, and they're fine. But as long as you're using a nutrient solution in your reservoirs, you don't really need to use the foliar spray. Now, I use General Hydroponics Flora series, and I'm not sponsored by them, but reach out, guys. And there are other brands that are available, and I'm sure they all work equally well. That's simply the one that I'm familiar with. So by using that nutrient solution in the reservoir of my pots, or for watering the ones that are in an organic mix, like bark and sphagnum, or bark, sphagnum, pumice, something like that, they're going to get lots of the nutrients, almost all the nutrients they need. Even if you're growing it in an organic mix, there's still not the amount of nutrients in that mix that's going to help the plant grow really well. So even my plants that are in net pots and cover pots get regular watering with my nutrient solution. So, you can't depend upon just water alone. There's not enough in there. Now, if you're using it in self-watering and it has good access to light, there may be some algae that develops in the reservoirs. It just happens. There's products you can use that will take care of that. I've been using a little bit of Pure Crop in my solution, and that seems to have taken care of the algae problems. But yeah, regular, even watering and regular feeding are important to getting your plants to grow really well. Another thing we mentioned before was light. Now, most all of my lacunosas get 12 to 14 hours of light a day. But they don't need that much. They are just lucky and they get it. Sometimes even just near a bright window will do. And I have lacunosa growing up here, and I have another lacunosa growing down here. I have a rather large one that's growing in my den in west-facing windows that are shaded in the summer, and in the wintertime only get a few hours of bright light a day. Now, the more vegetation, the more variegation, the more variegated vegetation that you have in your plant, the more light it's going to need. At least that seems to be my experience with them. Remember that the plant only makes food in the green parts of the leaf, so the more white, the less manufacturing facilities there are in the plant leaf. So you have to make sure that the green bits that are there can get as much light as they can so they can produce as much food as necessary. Now, this plant, which is Hoya lacunosa, Mr. Tent, as you can see, is perhaps getting a little bit too much light up top because he's a little pale. But I can fix that. There's also a little bit of sun stress, which doesn't look particularly good on him, because the leaves are usually just really pretty like that and not that paler green. So I might try and find a different location for him. They don't need 12 to 14 hours a day, and they probably can do well with a lot less. But the setup works for most of the others here, so every so often I have to move things around and shake things up for them just a little bit. Now, you don't have to have a grow light. I do. This particular room doesn't get a lot of natural light. That's actually, well, that's north, that direction. So that's more or less east. And I don't have any direct east-facing windows in here. And not much light comes in through this window over here. So yeah, they just, they're fairly adaptable. They're going to want a nice amount of light to grow really well, but they'll do okay in pretty different levels of light. Don't put them on the other side of the room. But for example, these two that live over here get some early morning, fairly direct sun, and that seems to be enough to keep them going. But yeah, and this one, as I said, is Hoya lacunosa, Mr. 10. And yes, Hoya lacunosa bloom readily for me. I don't have any problems getting them to bloom as long as I keep the moisture level steady. And they get a decent amount of light, and they're happy to bloom. And I'll put some pictures of what the blooms, just general lacunosa blooms over here. They all look very, very similar. And I happen to like the smell. Some people have described the smell of lacunosa as cat pee. And I've never had a cat, so I'm not really familiar with it. To me, it makes me think of hyacinth, or that smell when you walk into a florist shop and you getting that smell of all those blossoms at once. But they do really well. Once they start blooming for you, they'll bloom regularly. It doesn't seem to be any particular time of the year, just whenever they feel like it, and they'll keep blooming steadily. And I really like lacunosa blooms. And this one is my Hoya lacunosa intervariegated. And as you can see, it has reverted. So I need to get in here and do some trimming and take a cutting and see if we can get a nice, beautiful variegated plant again. But it's healthy. It's got those gorgeous lacunosa leaves, even if they're all green, and has done really, really well for me. So Hoya lacunosa intervariegated. And Hoya lacunosa maintenance. It couldn't be easier. If you're using a self-watering pot, just make sure there's always moisture in that reservoir. Don't overfill it. Prune it as you need to. Every so often I have to go in and just chop a bunch off the bottom of these because they grow really, really well. And other than that, make sure there are no pests. The only thing that I've had difficulty with in terms of pests is flat mites. And maybe once a year or so, I'll do a sulfur treatment just in case, but they don't have any issues. It's just not difficult. I do keep my Hoya collection fairly well isolated from other stuff, and I am careful when I bring in new plants. So we haven't had a mealybug outbreak in here in a long time. We've had mealybug issues elsewhere with my orchids, for example, but not really a problem once you get them licked and if you're careful. And this one is Hoya lacunosa snowcaps, and I found it in a big box store, so you know it wasn't terribly expensive. And this hangs in a west-facing window that gets a little bit of light during the winter, and it's in bloom. And it moves out on the porch in the summer, and it's just a gorgeous plant with this sort of mottled variegation on there. So yeah, lacunosas are easy. They're very easy. Once you get it settled, not a problem plant. And some thoughts on lacunosa. I find Hoya lacunosa to be super, super easy. If you've had trouble with them, then go down that list and look item by item and see if there's something you can do differently. You can't just keep buying another plant and trying to grow it the same old way and expect different results. That's that definition thing, So try something different. The most important thing to growing lacunosa, and in all reality, all Hoyas and most other plants, is an open mind. If what you're doing isn't working, try something else. It usually works for me. The something else, not, I have sometimes crazy ideas about how things should be, and they don't always work out that way. So, if it ain't working, try and fix it. Now, I used to think that I was going to try and collect all the lacunosa, and that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen for you either. There are very, very many species, and new cultivars coming out every day. And people are coming up with crazy names for the mutations that sometimes naturally occur. So it may be the hot plant of the moment. It may be the one everybody's showing on Instagram and talking about. And it may cost a lot of money. And there'll be something else new next week. So don't pay top dollar. Don't spend a lot of money on collecting these. And speaking of collecting, lacunosas are great to trade. Because there are so many different varieties and cultivars, not to mention the species, it's easy to trade cuttings with other people. You can use Facebook affinity groups. You can just post stuff online. If you've got something you want to trade, or if you've got something you're looking for, you can add it to the comments here. I don't really mind. I won't delete a listing. If somebody says, I'm looking for this, or somebody says, I've got some of this, anybody interested? Trade. Most of the people who post here are really nice people, and I don't think you have much to worry about. And that's a great way to grow your collection. And I think lacunosas are really good for beginners because the basic ones, which I think are beautiful anyway, are easy to find and they're not terribly expensive. So if you've had trouble with lacunosa in the past, look at your list of what you did and think of what you could do differently. And maybe it'll be time to try lacunosas again. And now the question for the comments. And first, I'd like to thank everyone who took the time to respond to last week's question. It was funny because I only got one of the answers I expected to get, but there was universal approval of the other answer I got. Everyone, their first comment, what plant would you get if it was a perfect world and money were no object, was a greenhouse, conservatory. Yeah, and that hadn't even occurred to me. I was thinking plants, but yeah, I'd love to have a conservatory. I see myself sitting at a table in the mornings, drinking my coffee and hanging out with the plants. But yeah, no heat in my enclosed porch, so everybody's got to come in for the winter, and it's too cold out there right now for even me. So the question for the comments this week is Team Lacunosa or never again? Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are, and we'll see how this discussion goes. And as always, I want to thank you for choosing to spend a little bit of your time with me this week's end. Please remember the thumbs up like button, the subscribe button, the notification bell, and if you're on a mobile device, when you're finished looking at everything and adding your comments, please click on that hype button. It helps show YouTube that people are interested in the video and helps them decide to show it to other people, to recommend it to others who might also enjoy the content. A lot of the products that you've seen me use are available through my Amazon storefront. There's a link in the description, or there's this QR code that you can use to visit the storefront. I receive a commission on the sales, but it doesn't affect your price whatsoever and is a nice way to help support the channel. If you're in the market for grow lights, I have a relationship with Sansi, and there's a link in the description, or you can use the QR code that you're seeing now and my checkout code to receive a 30% discount on the prices you find on that website. I've been really happy with my Sansi grow lights, and they've made a big difference in the lives of some of my plants, and I think you'll like them too. If you'd like to support the channel directly, here's a QR code for my Buy Me a Coffee page, or down here there's a Super Thanks button, and YouTube handles all the stuff for the Super Thanks. I'm going to post links to a couple more videos over here on the side, and please enjoy the rest of your week's end.